Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. I'm with Arick Fudali. He is a civil rights advocate and partner and managing attorney at the Bloom firm.
Thank you for having me, Natalie.
I'm so glad that you're here, especially today. There has been so much conversation around the Epstein files, and we saw some atrocious behavior from Pam Bondi earlier, and I want to get right into that. But I want to talk a little bit about your work. You're representing 11 of the Jeffrey Epstein trafficking network survivors, and you've really been at the forefront here of public scrutiny over the Justice Department's handling of the newly released Epstein files. You've spoken out around the egregious redaction errors that have exposed survivors' identities and the failure to release key documents that could illuminate how powerful figures were involved in enabling the abuses. You've also been very vocal on national media about broader threats to civil rights, including the alarming federal arrest recently of journalist John Lemon. I want to get into that a little bit too. But let's kick things off talking about what happened earlier today. I mean, this just happened to be that you were able to connect with me today, and here we are talking about real breaking news in this moment. Attorney General Pam Bondi rejected a request from Representative Jayapali to turn and address survivors today of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, who was seated in the audience during a House Judiciary Committee hearing. The exchange escalated. It was wild to watch this unfold into a shouting match, with Bondi accusing the representative of engaging in theatrics. Bondi would not apologize to the survivors. Let's just kick it off there. What did you make of this?
It was appalling to start. I mean, really gross behavior from the Attorney General. Unfortunately, that's exactly what I expected to happen today. I think I was interviewed yesterday, about what my expectations are for today, and they were basically
Yeah.
just that Pam Bondi will try to deflect, she'll attack, and the last thing she'll do is show any empathy or any care for the well-being of the survivors. And what's so frustrating and so impactful about that is that that's nothing new. That's really what this Department of Justice has been doing and how they've handled the Epstein survivors for months, for years, and frankly, Natalie, it's basically how every Department of Justice and every law enforcement and every administration for the past few decades has handled the Epstein survivors. It's just consistently been protecting the predators, protecting the accused predators, protecting Epstein and those in his circle, and a complete disregard for the well-being of the victims and potential future victims. And this goes all the way back to the 90s.
So, looking at this from that lens and also your involvement, do you ever worry about safety for yourself or for the people that you're representing? Because I do think, to your point, there's a reason this can has gotten kicked further and further down the road until basically the cliff that we're at now. Does that ever concern you?
I mean, the short answer, for my safety, no, I don't believe I'm certainly not concerned. My mom asked that question sometimes, but no, but I don't really have any concern for that. And it's not so much a safety concern. Well, although I will say, something I believe is unreported or underreported about Epstein and his victims is the amount of fear and intimidation he put into
Yes.
his victims. And of course, we all hear about the horrific sexual abuse and the trafficking, but I don't think it's reported enough that he used a lot of intimidation and threats to control his victims. I mean, true, not like vague threats, like true, like
Yeah.
I will kill your family type threats. I will kill you type threats, to the point that a lot of my clients, even though, they accept that Jeffrey Epstein's dead, still have multiple alarms on their homes, still, see his face out their window at night when, turning off the lights. They still live in real fear of Jeffrey Epstein and his circle. And as more and more documents are revealed and there's more and more protection for Jeffrey Epstein, even beyond the grave, and protection for his inner circle and his associates, it's pretty understandable why. He kept very powerful people and in his close circle, and those powerful people continue to try to protect him and themselves.
Arick, also during this hearing, Attorney General Bondi clashed not only with representatives, but with others, including Representative Jerry Nadler and Jamie Raskin, dismissing questions about how many, to your point, of Epstein's co-conspirators have been indicted or investigated, saying she wouldn't, quote unquote, get in the gutter. From your perspective, because I know a lot of people are just frustrated at what seems like a lack of movement in our justice system here. What does that exchange signal about the Justice Department's willingness or reluctance to pursue accountability in this case?
That this is all just about covering up and moving on. That this is all
Mm,
about an attempt from the Department of Justice to cover up, and to hope the story dies just with that, without having to reveal anything else and without having to do any work to actually achieve justice or achieve accountability. Remember, it's important to recall that a law was not necessary here for the Department of Justice to release those documents. They could have just released them. There was no law preventing it, but it certainly didn't need a law to force it. But because of the strength and the courage of the survivors, ultimately, and some well-intentioned congresspersons, we were actually able to push forward and get a law passed and force the Department of Justice's hand. And it's just very clear where their priorities lie, and that's been clear for quite some time. And I think it was really exemplified in the way the documents were released, and perhaps even more so today during Pam Bondi's testimony. But it's that the Department of Justice seems intent on protecting the powerful, protecting those around Jeffrey Epstein, protecting the elite, protecting the accused, and have shown a complete disregard, and at the expense really at protecting or looking out for the well-being of the survivors. And again, this is sort of a pattern that goes back decades. It's nothing new. And what's so remarkable about the survivors is, despite being disregarded, despite being treated so poorly for decade after decade after decade, and just so intentionally, more recently, they continue to fight. And they're going to continue to fight. And I think that says a lot about the courage, the empowerment, and the bravery of these women. And that despite so much adversary, so much adverse actions by the Department of Justice, so much disregard,
mhm.
they continue to fight and are not deterred. They continue to rally. They continue to speak up. And the more and more people like yourself, continue to amplify their voices, the better. Because it's really important that, what this administration wants is to close the file, and let this story die. And it's really important that we don't allow that.
No, and that's why I really appreciated you taking time out of your very busy schedule to connect with me in exactly doing that, right?
Yeah.
To help to amplify this. I've seen you everywhere recently, and thank you for using your voice in this way. When we're talking about the DOJ in general, have you ever seen this level of sort of blatant corruption? I know you talk about how this goes back decade after decade, but to me, this beast is moving in a different way right now under the Trump regime. Is that what you notice, or do you think that's just optics?
I think as it relates to the Epstein file, this is nothing different. The last
Mhm.
time I can recall a law enforcement agency truly, truly failing victims would be in 2008, when Alex
Mhm.
Acosta gave Jeffrey Epstein the sweetheart deal that he did. It's been reported that Alex Acosta ignored up to 50 to 60 victims. It's been reported that he told his fellow prosecutors not to inform the victims of the plea deal, which is a big no-no when it comes to
Mhm.
prosecutor conduct. And that deal ultimately allowed Jeffrey Epstein to continue to abuse for another decade, right? I mean, one of my clients was trafficked from Uzbekistan in 2009. That means that Alex Acosta given Jeffrey Epstein a real punishment, put him behind bars for decades and decades, or for life, as sex traffickers should be. He would never have had the opportunity to meet my client. My client would be living a much different life right now, and he wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet a lot of his future victims that he victimized, after 2009 and well into the teens. So I think that was a big failure of the Department of Justice. And again, it goes back to Jeffrey Epstein for some reason, and I guess it's pretty clear by looking at the type of company he kept. But
Mm.
the most powerful continue to protect the most powerful, and so yeah, again, unfortunately, this is just nothing new.
So, when you look at your own trajectory and you see the work that is laid out in front of you, I've been getting a lot of people in my DMs because I talk about this issue a lot. And there is just a sense, Arick, of hopelessness around this, that nothing is going to be resolved, that, like you said, they're going to just try to sweep this under the rug. What do you want people to understand about these kinds of litigations? Because I used to be a social worker and I worked primarily with children that had been sexually abused from ages 2 to 21. And the thing that always struck me was how slow the system moved in
Yeah.
their favor, if at all. What has been your experience?
Right. That's actually another really great question. So it's interesting. So looking through the Epstein files, I realized that I'm actually in the Epstein files, of course, because it's all legal. It's all legal
Sure.
correspondence, of course. But it reminded me that I've been pursuing Jeffrey Epstein. I think the earliest was either 2015 or 2016. And I have seen nothing really but, a lack of justice. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein was able to kill himself after arrested in 2019, despite being under federal custody, which again, under very suspicious circumstances. Of course, we had Ghislaine Maxwell, the sole human being, the only person in the history of the world who's received any type of justice, any type of accountability in this Epstein saga. And now she's in a minimum security, resort style prison.
Mm.
So there's been zero accountability, zero justice, zero, anything for the victims. But I will say, I have a lot to discuss and a lot of criticism for how these last 3 million documents were released.
Mm.
But there is some information out there, and we are starting to see some names revealed. We are starting to see some semblance of accountability, even if it's just societal accountability, people
Mhm.
losing their jobs and be criticized publicly. We are starting to see some of it, and that's the most we've seen. This is the most transparency. This is the most information, we have seen or the public has seen in decades and decades and decades of pursuing Jeffrey Epstein. And that's all thanks to the survivors. It is 100% thanks to their voices and their courage. And then, of course, forcing congressmen to get behind that courage and to join with them. But I don't want to lose sight that there are some victories here. Getting
Mhm.
these millions of documents released into the public with real names being revealed. And, now that, Ro Khanna and Massey were able to review some of the documents unredacted, seeing more and more names revealed and more accountability. I mean, I've heard there's going to be NFL investigations into one of the presidents of one of the teams. I'm seeing music moguls or management moguls losing talent. I'm seeing people getting fired for their jobs, for their association. I'm seeing real difficult questions for those who continue to socialize closely or associate closely with Jeffrey Epstein. So there's a lot of bad things going on. There's a lot of injustice and a lot of lack of accountability from this Department of Justice. But I don't want to lose sight that there has been some progress, because I don't want it to seem like the fight of the survivors has been for naught, because that's not true. The fight of the survivors has resulted in accountability. It has resulted in some information. We have plenty of work to do. There's plenty more information to be revealed. There's plenty more redactions to be unredacted. And there's plenty of probably much more legal work for myself and my associates to continue to do. But I don't want to take for granted that there has been a modicum of accountability here, and there has been some victories. This law was passed, almost unanimously, except for that, whatever congressman from New Orleans, Louisiana, whoever he is, it's passed almost unanimously in the House. It was passed right through the Senate. There is support right now, and I don't
Mhm.
excited that, because I think that would be sort of a slight to all the fight and how much movement the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein have been able to accomplish.
Did you ever think you would actually see this level of public disclosure? I mean, I was taken aback when I was like, "Oh wow, they're really going to put those files out." Okay, I wasn't really sold on the fact that that was going to happen. Were you sort of surprised?
Yeah, I was actually, and that's a
Mhm.
fair question. I think perhaps I've been a little pessimistic given everything I know over the last decade of
Yeah.
investigating and pursuing Jeffrey Epstein. I unfortunately was a bit pessimistic about what I thought would ultimately happen, especially when they missed the first deadline, or a month and a half late, and there's all these, redaction disasters. One of my clients is unredacted her name over 500 times, and then all these, potential co-conspirators are redacted. It's been sort of almost incompetence. However, like you said,
Mhm.
there is some information out there, and I don't want to use the word pleasant, because there's nothing pleasant about this, but I will say I've
Sure.
been at least somewhat pleasantly surprised about the amount of information and the amount of immediate accountability I'm starting to see with those who closely associated themselves with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, especially those who closely associated themselves with Jeffrey Epstein after 2008, which is when he became a publicly registered sex offender. I think it's really
Mhm.
important, especially, as we're parsing through these documents and learning, who had connections. That 2008 date is really important. I really think well, of course, it's not a crime to associate with Jeffrey Epstein or to communicate with him. But I do think that it really requires some heavy scrutiny if you continued to socialize and associate closely with Jeffrey
Mhm.
Epstein after he became a
Mm.
registered sex offender.
Oh, I think that's a very good point. And I wanted to go back to what you were talking about around the redaction process. You've described it as both incompetent and potentially designed to protect powerful individuals. Can you explain why those in positions of influence seemed to have avoided scrutiny for as long as they did? And even as many of the survivors' names did surface publicly? Because this really, I think, angered a lot of people. It was reversed.
Yeah, it was a complete reversal of what they should have done. I mean,
Hmm.
it was baffling how blatant it was. At first, I heard, okay, one of my clients named over 500 times. Okay, maybe they just missed her name. Okay, fine, given the benefit of the doubt. Then I found another one of my clients, so, had been, her name had been revealed 5 times. Then I spoke to other attorneys who are representing survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and found that there's been driver's license pictures posted of survivors. There's been nude pictures completely identifying survivors. And I'm like, okay, well, this is just blatant incompetence. Then I learned, of course, that they're actually redacting alleged co-conspirators of Jeffrey Epstein. And there's these, very salacious emails where the name of the recipient or the sender of the email is redacted. And the only logical, reasonable conclusion from all of that is that this is intentional. I don't know what's going on at the Department of Justice. I don't know what their actual, impetus behind this is. I don't know why they've handled it this way, but I don't know what other conclusion someone could come to when you look at the documents that are released and you see that they did a abhorrent job in redacting the victims' names, but a commendable job in redacting the co-conspirators' names. I don't know what other conclusion you could come to other than, we this is an intentional cover up.
I want to expand a little bit our conversation. In addition to the Epstein case, and in addition to all of this work, you've also publicly criticized the recent arrest of journalist Don Lemon and others, calling it alarming for press freedom. And I want to tie these issues together. I think it's important to connect dots here when we're talking about intimidation, when we're talking about trying to keep the public out of the loop, right? Because I see all of these things as interconnected. How do you see the intersection of civil rights, the legal process abuses, and media rights playing out in the broader context of accountability in the United States as, of course, it relates back to the Epstein case here?
That's a really great question, and I think, the short answer to a very long conversation would be
We could have a whole other one.
yeah, exactly. I think it would be it's more of the disregard for rights, whether it's
Mm,
civil rights, whether it's victims' rights, whether it's media rights or First Amendment rights or um, you know, racial rights or, nationality rights, whatever it is, it's the disregard
yeah.
for rights of Americans. And that's what has been so alarming. And that is what is so concerning. It's almost been like levels and levels and levels and, it's scarier and scarier and scarier
Yeah.
and more infuriating. You keep, almost you'll say, okay, well, at least they're not arresting journalists yet. Right. And then they start arresting journalists, or at least they're not, at least, okay, they messed up some names, they messed up some, redactions of the victims. At least they're not redacting names of potential predators. Oh, no, wait, they are actually redacting the names of the potential co-conspirators and potential predators. At least they're not disregarding due process. Oh, no, okay, actually, you know what they are? They're completely disregarding due process and arresting people, on site and, reporting or whatever it is. So, I think it all comes down to just a disregard for the rights of Americans and the rights for people in America. And when you start disregarding rights, you then start to be empowered, unfortunately, to just trample upon rights and to start taking away rights and to start completely ignoring rights and intentionally ignoring rights. So I think that's why it's so important that we continue to bring attention to all of this. That this story, it's not just Jeffrey Epstein.
Right.
Jeffrey Epstein, I think, is a model of how as we sit here today, unfortunately, is a model or an example as that powerful white men can get away with whatever they want, right? I mean, that's sort of the message that's being sent here. You are a powerful billionaire and you're friends with Donald Trump. You're good. You're good. Even if you get convicted, Donald Trump's not even going to rule. I mean, as we sit here today, Donald Trump hasn't ruled out a pardon or clemency for Ghislaine Maxwell, which is so
Mm.
beyond, just disgusting. I can't even describe it. But to bring it sort of back to your question, I think it's about a deprivation and a disregard for the rights of Americans in order to achieve whatever goal they want to achieve. For Epstein, it appears to be they want to they want to get rid of this case, they want to get rid of this story, they want it to die out, they want to protect those closest, to Jeffrey Epstein, the powerful. So they're going to disregard the rights of victims, and I think that sort of example can be shown how they've attempted to deprive the rights of many other individuals in this country.
What motivates you to do this work? Because you could be a lawyer in a different space. I mean, this is the kind of thing I think that probably keeps you awake at night, just
Yeah.
thinking over and over about these people and these real lives that you're impacting with every decision and choice that you're making. What motivates you to keep doing this?
I mean, there's a lot of answers to that question. The first one I'm going to say is the ability to help. Certainly this job can be stressful for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
but there are not a lot of jobs out there where I actually go to sleep every night knowing I probably helped someone
Yeah.
today. I actually probably got, we get I'm very lucky that my partner, my law partner and I, we get sent really, really beautiful messages all the time. And it's not something I know that other people in my field get to experience. I get to see pictures of, survivors that I've helped with their families and doing well in their lives after, our representation ends. I get to actually see real change in people and I get to see, true justice achieved for the people that need it most. And that's a real I'm very privileged to have that opportunity and to be in a situation where I can help people in my line of work. But so that keeps me going. Obviously, so it's helping people. It's also creating change. The best way to
Yeah.
change laws, the best way to protect people, is to expose those who are trying to deprive them of their rights. Right. The best way to
Mhm.
protect women is to expose predators and hold them accountable. The best way to protect peaceful protesters is to expose and bring those who, enforce police brutality and excessive force to justice. That's another area of what we do. The best way to protect LGBTQ, Americans is to, when they are, discriminated against in their job, is to hold those entities accountable. And that's what we do. So it's really about holding, entities, holding powerful people accountable on behalf of those whose rights are being trampled, those rights are being taken advantage of, those rights are being disregarded, and you actually see change. It's not just about protecting one individual, it's about protecting multiple individuals, and it's about changing the laws, changing the perspective. Me Too happened, Me Too movement happened on the backs of women who came forward and lawyers who represented them and people who pushed for change and pushed for public accountability. And we saw real change there. We're trying to do that again. And then the other thing, the last I think is just, the survivors, they are so much stronger than I am. They take a lot more, punishment than I do. Get a lot more public scrutiny than I do. They live in a lot more fear than I do, and they've, been deprived of their rights a lot more than I have. So, I'm fine, right? It's the survivors that sort of give me the strength, and I think these Epstein survivors are another great example of that. That for decades and decades they've been abused, they've been exploited, they've been trafficked. They continue to be exploited by, politicians for political gain. They continue to be exploited by the Department of Justice and disregarded, but they have not lost any fight. I mean, it's so remarkable. Just they were there. There were survivors there today at the
I
Pam
know.
Bondi hearing, watching her disrespect them. They've done rally after rally. I was at a rally with them, speaking at a rally in DC a few months ago. Just so empowering. They just continue to fight and continue to advocate for themselves. And so that strength, that courage, that bravery and empowerment really also keeps me going.
Well, Arick, I know you said earlier that your mom does worry about you, but I'm sure she's very proud of you
Oh,
too.
that's
So,
very nice of you to say. Thank you.
yeah, as we wrap this up, I want to look forward and talk about the future. And I know the ultimate goal, of course, is, retribution, is some kind of accountability, something
Right.
that people can say tangibly changed. Looking ahead, what is your hope for the future for the survivors of Epstein, and of course, for the justice system? Really, what are your hopes?
Yeah, so it's three things we're looking for, and I think I can speak on behalf of probably not just my clients, but most Epstein survivors right now, and that is exposure,
Mhm.
accountability, and then closure. Okay. But you can't have closure without accountability. You can't have accountability without exposure. So the first thing is exposure. Every single file in possession of the Department of Justice needs to be 100% released with zero redactions other than those that are necessary to protect the identities of victims. That's it. No attorney-client privilege nonsense, no ongoing investigation nonsense, no mistakenly redacting the names of co-conspirators, anything like that. Full transparency, full release, no redactions except for those necessary to hide, of course, the identities of the victims. And then it's holding those who are revealed accountable, whether that's criminal accountability, whether it's civil accountability, whether it's what I call societal accountability, or all three. There needs to be true justice and true accountability for those who facilitated, those who enabled, and perhaps even those who co-abused with Jeffrey Epstein. And once we have those two, then we can have closure. then the survivors can say, we did it, right? We did everything we possibly could. We got the files released. We exposed these people who enabled and facilitated Jeffrey Epstein, perhaps even co-abused with him. We held them accountable. We brought them to justice. And now we can have closure. Now we can move on with our lives. And that's what they're fighting for. That's what I'm fighting for. And that's what we will all, of course, continue to fight for.
Arick, thank you so much for taking time out to join me today for Facts Over Fear. I'd love to have you back on because, of course, I think there's so much more to discuss, but I so appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Thanks for, doing these types of interviews and continuing to amplify my voice, which ultimately is just the amplification of the survivor's voice. So I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Absolutely. If you haven't yet, everybody, you can go to the top screen here and subscribe to our Substacks and support our work. And until next time, as always, everyone, please take care of yourselves and each other. Have a good night. Thanks again, Arick.
Thank you.